Does Ladanya Amerikanski?
MLK would definitely be a part of the Black Lives Matter movement.
No one does philosophy. No one even has a life without thinking about what kind of life should I live. This stuff is fucking important.
It's like trails and blazes with the map getting lost, sticking labels on lists on. Fake ladies and males get their shit on, made up and murdered like women gliding with their wings gone.
Sweet! Alright, well, welcome to Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I'm Austin Hayden Smith.
And I'm Troy Polidori.
Alright, let's get going.
So our first segment is the shitty minute, where one of us rants for a minute, usually more, on whatever is grinding our gears, giving us existential dread, whatever it may be. Austin, you got the torch this week.
Sweet. Yeah, I don't know if mine this week causes existential dread so much as it just is like nails on a chalkboard to my political and social sensibility. And it has to do with when Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and the conservative cohort come together and collectively repeat the same thing about the Black Lives Matter movement, which is that Martin Luther King would be rolling over in his grave at the Black Lives motherfucking Matter movement. Listen, motherfuckers, you guys don't know shit about Martin Luther King, because every time MLK Day comes around, you guys try to claim that, he was like this friendly, jolly, nice black guy that would never disrupt the system at all, and he just wanted to be our friends and tell us how we should all just be colorblind and link arms together. Shut the fuck up, okay? He was a radical civil disruptor. Now, did he use peaceful means? Sure he did. Did he want us to link arms together? Absolutely he did. But he in no way wanted to whitewash things and create some sort of colorblind society. And you know what it actually seems like to me? It actually seems like there's actually something inherently racist in this claim that Martin Luther King would be against the Black Lives Matter movement. Because it's kind of like they're basically saying, you know, the one black guy that we historically like, that actually the one black guy that means something to us historically, he would be on our side. But of course there's no talk of Malcolm X, because they know damn right where Malcolm X would stand on the issue. And even if MLK and Malcolm X did have some disagreements, I'm pretty sure I can damn well say with some degree of certainty that they would both be marching for BLM. Now, that doesn't mean that they'd advocate all the actions that anyone who waves the banner of BLM, of the BLM flag, so to speak, that they're kind of espousing, but that's because that Black Lives Matter isn't a homogenous, singular entity. It's like this, it's a disposition, it's a tendency, it's a mindset, it's a positioning in opposition to something, and most importantly, and this is the key, most importantly, it's like this varied, dispersed grouping of people. So it's not like this singular thing, but they have to kind of do that so that they can have, I don't know, some sort of proprietary claim over this, and then, of course, over the human legacy of Martin Luther King. And that drives me goddamn crazy.
Preach.
Yeah. I figured you'd have something to say and follow up to that. That's kind of, isn't it fucking annoying as shit?
Yeah, I mean, just the lack of, historical reference in Martin Luther King. You know, the anti-war stance, the letter from Birmingham jail. The entire argument that MLK had to have with the good white Christians was that, any unjust law is not a law that needs to be followed. Right. Even from a, religious duty standpoint. I don't think that ever is even brought into discussion.
No.
At this point.
No. I know. It's freaking crazy, man. I'm like, yo, let me just tell you. MLK would definitely be a part of the Black Lives Matter movement. To what degree or in what way, that we can't really say for certain. But I don't know. I don't want to talk too much about this because we have a whole episode that's dedicated to it. Episode 1, callback. Go check it out. But there are people like Mark Lamont Hill who, if you listen to him, he very much stands in the King legacy, it seems like to me. And he is an advocate of the Black Lives Matter movement. That doesn't mean that he's advocating, killing the cops in Dallas, but I don't know how much you can say that that is some sort of essential action, or that was some sort of essential action of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's just that there's an inability of people to think critically and to allow for complex variations within these types of discussions to actually flow, and it just causes radical confusion and conflations, and it drives me up the goddamn wall.
Yeah, most definitely. Wasn't MLK's, to correct me if I'm wrong, but even when he did speak to Malcolm X and the Panthers and the more aggressive movements at the time, it wasn't a confrontational relationship, right? It was more of a, trying to be persuasive towards the other. Understanding that you're not responding to an invisible plight. Like, this is a real thing, and I understand and sympathize with your argument for violence. But I don't want to do it that way, and here's the reasons why.
Exactly.
It was
but
a brotherly
nevertheless,
relationship.
It was a brotherly relationship, and nevertheless, they were still standing united in the same cause. And to me, that's actually that would be, I think, the kind of relation now with the BLM movement, is they would both be standing for BLM, but Malcolm X and the Black Panthers obviously wanted to advocate violence, whereas MLK didn't. But nevertheless, they still would be on the side of the BLM movement, which is really just a sort of, it's not a new movement, it's just a kind of, a sort of refiguring or a sort of restructuring of the same sort of sentiment. So, anyway, this is way more than a minute, so it was like the shitty 5 minutes. But fuck, it made me so angry. It makes me angry constantly. Shut your mouth, Bill O'Reilly. What, you gonna come at me, bro? You gonna come at me, Bill? What, take your millions, come at me, bro. If you can't see what I'm doing over the thing right now, I'm posturing all big right now, and I'm naked, so...
Come on, I've got a day to discover you. Slaves getting paid, getting rich on days off. Flames getting played, heat up the covers and make you wish you had your water gun saying, was this fun?
Okay, well, let's transition to the main segment now, because that's what we do on this show. We get into the real shit. And this week, we are going to do a sort of bio-philosophy. Troy called it, what'd you call it?
Bro-losophy?
Bro-losophy this week, where we are going to basically give a sort of biographical sketch on who we are and where we came from and why we study philosophy and what we think the importance of philosophy is. And Troy, what else do you want to say about how we're going to discuss today's topic?
Yeah, I guess it can kind of act as a thesis statement for the podcast, as in you give a little bit of our background, what we studied, and why we find it to be relevant towards a lot of the stuff we talk about on the podcast, social, political stuff, and even the bullshit. Maybe.
Yeah, it's a good thing we decided to put the thesis statement 4 episodes in. That's really good writing. Good writing, guys. Good job.
We had to have our hook first, and now we're getting to the thesis.
That's right. Oh, okay. Troy, why don't you start us off? Tell us, when did you first fall in love with wisdom?
Well, I feel like we could probably speak, contemporaneously about this subject, since I'm guessing it kind of happened the same way at the same time for both of us. Different periods of our life, probably, and from different places. But I had a theological background, which is actually a background that many historical philosophers have had, where you have a natural inner drive to seek the quote-unquote big questions, right? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life? Does God exist? The basic stuff that you can read in comics and on the back of milk cartons, which I don't know if they do that anymore, but...
No, I don't think they do.
Yeah, probably not. That makes no sense to anybody else but me.
Almond milk cartons, that's all I drink anyway. So. I got a quick question for you. Did you grow up in the church? Is that why you were even studying theology in the first place?
Not quite, but in high school I had a bit of a great awakening. Jonathan Edwards style, spider hanging over the flames, about to be dropped. And
for people who don't know that reference, that Jonathan Edwards was a really famous sort of Puritan pastor of the Second Great Awakening in American Christianity, and he gave this famous sermon which he talks about how we as people are just like a spider dangling over the fire, just hanging by a tiny little piece of, what's that called again? So what does a spider spit out? Not yarn.
Web?
Thank you. In my mind, I was thinking yarn, and I was like, it's not yarn. Yeah, thank you. A web. But anyway, that we're just dangling by that piece of spider yarn, and that at any moment we could fall into the pit of fire. And people freaked out, and they were listening to this sermon, and this is the 1700s, right? So people freaked out, and they were like, oh my God! And they started running out of the church and repenting and crying out to God. So Troy had a similar awakening experience where the fear of God gripped him.
Yeah, who writes like that? Jesus.
The Puritans. They were a happy bunch, man. I heard something the other day. Cotton Mather, who was another Puritan pastor in America, said something about all of these Native Americans died in one bloody battle in early America. And Cotton Mather was like, and on that day, 500, what did he say? 500 savage souls were sent to hell. And it's like, really? Is that the mind of Jesus? I don't know. It's kind of harsh, brother. But
You could probably say the same thing about wars in the Middle East. I would guess someone said that same thing.
They do. So okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, but anyway, so I had that pretty stereotypical religious awakening, and went to an evangelical college. We both did, and was studying to actually work in the ministry. Became gripped by academic theology because those questions were really what mattered to me anyway. And then after a couple of years of studying, found that as deep as I could go, this material, this content couldn't answer the questions that I had. I found the answers to be wanting, to not be intellectually satisfying or existentially satisfying. And I needed to find other means to answer those questions. Began delving into the philosophical side of things and realized, well, the answers weren't readily apparent. I could see the road to them, or at least the road itself was much more intellectually and existentially satisfying than what I felt was more an attempt to comfort oneself and others that I found in the theological pursuit. And so it was really a smooth transition. I mean, it was jagged in terms of, you have to sort of question everything that means, the meaning of everything in your life and what you're doing with your life and your school and your friends and family and your mentors and everything. But it was smooth in the sense that there was not a huge break at any point. And this has been a story that, I'm sure was similar for like Hegel and for Kant and for many other of the European post-Christian philosophers, in that they had these same questions. Theology couldn't answer them, and so philosophy was the only way to do that.
That's interesting. Do you remember when in your theological training, like what year?
Well, that's the thing, is that it was so smooth that, from sophomore year to senior year, it was just one small change after another. I mean, to get specific, it goes from the more conservative evangelical theology. I started reading Karl Barth, which is not a liberal Protestant, but from American Christianity, it's considered liberal Protestantism.
Yeah, and then in the history of theology, he's actually considered conservative.
Yeah, exactly. In the history of compared to actual liberal theology, yeah.
Right.
But at the time, that was radical in a sense that was liberal, and then from there, Karl Barth obviously influenced by a number of German philosophers. Getting into that, and so
so it was Barth. It was Karl Barth, German theologian, who introduced you to Hegel, etc., and that's how you got into philosophy?
Well, not so much, because Barth didn't do much of anything on Hegel, but it was having both of those things, coterminously, that really did it. I was taking philosophy classes, reading Kant, and Hegel was more grad school stuff, and Hume and others, and then at the same time moving left theologically, and those things just coalesced. So yeah, strangely, it was actually it was much more of an intellectual transition. I know that beliefs aren't entirely intellectualist, and I don't hold to that position philosophically, but it certainly felt like, and I would describe that experience as a largely intellectual one. It was changing of beliefs based upon having reasons that were now no longer satisfied by the answers I had.
That's interesting. Now, when you say that you were at school to prepare to go into the ministry, were you going to be a pastor? Pastor Pastor Polidori?
Yeah.
Pastor Polidori?
My students would probably say I still am.
Oh, you get a
I
little
still
preachy?
get on a soapbox sometimes and, gesticulate wildly and use horrific metaphors like Edwards did. It still happens on occasion. Let's hear your biophilosophical musings.
So I actually did have more of a break than you. You say you had a smooth transition. I kind of grew up in the church. My parents were never married, so they split up when I was like 1 year old. And then my dad got cancer when he was 30, so I was about 7 or 8. and he started going, that was his conversion. And so he started going to church on the weekends. But I split time, so I would spend time with my mom during the week and then my dad on the weekends. And I actually did go to like a private Christian school for kindergarten, first and second grade. And I was in Awana, and I had to learn Bible verses and stuff like that. So I still remember Ephesians 4:32 from Awana. Not because when I studied Bible later. I remember it in the King James Version that I studied when I was in first or second grade at Awana at this private school. So that's
Prove
weird.
it. What is it?
And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you.
Nice.
Boom!
King James even. Yeah, you're right.
I told you, dude. I don't know why, but that's the one thing I remember. So I had a bit of a Christian upbringing. And then when my dad converted, we started going to church a lot more consistently. And then when I was about 16, I went through, on the weekends when I would visit him. And then at 16, I went through my rebellious phase, or one of my rebellious phases. And I didn't really want to hang out with my pops and he was pretty strict, and I kind of wanted to do my own thing. I was in a rock band, and I thought I was pretty freaking cool, so I didn't want to go to church on the weekends anymore, so I stopped. And then I had a radical conversion when I was 21 or 22-ish. I was living in LA doing the Hollywood thing, doing the actor thing, and I had a radical conversion when I was high on some drugs. When I was high on some drugs one night.
Much like Edwards as well.
Yeah, I thought I was going to die and go to hell. So, yeah, I freaked out, and then the next morning I kind of rededicated my life, so to speak, and that's when I got hooked up with our mutual mentor, a guy named John. We'll redact his last name, because we don't have permission, but
you wouldn't want to be associated with us anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I still love John, even though he
ditto.
Yeah, but he was a mentor for both of us, and we kind of got hooked up with him in separate ways. But my dad had known him from taking university courses, and so he hooked me up with this guy who was a mentor who kind of introduced me to Reformed evangelical theology, and introduced me to the Master's College, which that's where we obviously went. Is that something we can say, or should I redact that out?
Fuck it, do it live.
Do it live. And so we ended up going to that school, and I, like you, went to study to be a pastor. I thought I was gonna, be like an Apostle Paul and travel the world and do church planting and minister to the poor and to the needy, but all, while dangling that carrot of individual salvation in front of them. And it was two things that happened while I was in school. One was intellectual and one was personal. And the intellectual one was I got introduced to a New Testament scholar named N.T. Wright, who put forth this idea, or he was a part of a movement, quote unquote, called the New Perspective on Paul, which basically argued that Christianity doesn't really understand the proper context in interpreting the New Testament, that contemporary American evangelicalism and really the history of the Christian church has kind of really missed out on something. And so he put forth these different ideas, and those ideas really opened me up to the idea of the importance of community, and how the purpose of Christianity was ultimately about creating the singular people of God, right? And that it was ultimately about union, and kind of quoting Paul, the idea that there is neither slave nor free, nor male nor female, nor Jew nor Greek, for all are one. That sort of idea, the identity of union, and creating the singular God's people. And then that kind of morphed in grad school as well. But at the same time that this was going on, that I was having this intellectual challenging, I was in a relationship with a girl whose father fucking hated me. He hated me because he thought that I was going to corrupt his daughter because I was studying philosophy, or I was interested in philosophy. And he was like, I remember a couple things he would say. He's like, why don't you just go into the rooms with that Bible under your arm and just preach the gospel? And I was like, well, I don't know. But he was so scared, and it was his fear and his stubbornness and his inability to be able to actually critically think about the Bible. He could critically think about everything else, but only from the perspective of the Bible. And it was his inability to think critically about things that kind of really started to make me question, what is he so afraid of? What is it? Why is he not strong enough to think that his faith or that the Christian tradition can actually withstand these criticisms? And then when I started to examine the criticisms, it kind of came to pass that, I get why he was afraid, because the position that he's holding ultimately is one on shaky ground. And that when you actually start to unravel a lot of these theological ideas that the Christian tradition uphold, and the various different Christian traditions uphold, it started to become very apparent to me that they were constructs, developed by groups of individuals that were trying to explain something that they had experienced or that they understood or that they thought they understood. And then that continued through grad school, and I started, my foray into philosophy actually came through, through theology, but through liberation theology and through individuals who were doing philosophy of religion, but from a sort of radical leftist political position. So they were still kind of like, yeah, we like Jesus, and we still like some of the ideas of Jesus, or there's some usefulness in Jesus, but we want to kind of push it a little bit further. And so that was kind of what happened for me. Philosophy for me is more of a realization of my same earlier Christian concerns, but in the kind of classical Marxian sense, it's about realizing those religious concerns through political and social means.
Yeah, you were remarking on the girl you were dating in college. I'm pretty sure I remember lots of conversations over Chinese food about this, and
Yeah.
talking about how he couldn't think critically about his own beliefs, but only about how his beliefs affected everything outside of him. I remember we had a mutual professor at our college who was very intelligent and who I respect immensely to this day.
I still respect him. I know what you're going to say, and I still love this man. He's a stud.
Well, it may be the other person you're not thinking
No,
of.
no,
I'm not sure.
I know
Okay.
exactly what you're going to say.
He one time we were talking about, he was very into post-structuralism and Derrida and other things.
Yep.
And at one point we asked, or one of us asked, if we're using deconstruction on all these texts and close reading and stuff like this, why is it that we don't do this to the Bible? And he remarked, he held it up above his head, a Bible up above his head, and he said, "This deconstructs you."
Yes, I
And
remember
everyone was
that.
like, "Whoa, D."
Yeah.
And we were like, "No, that's bullshit.
What does that even mean?
that doesn't mean anything."
Yeah.
Like, okay, sure, like you got to deconstruct yourself too. Yeah, okay, obviously, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a constitutive exception
Right.
in deconstruction. That's what the Bible was acting as for him. And so yeah, that didn't sell us at all. And so that was the point where I think we kind of realized, at least over time, that this there's a huge lie at the foundation of this thing. And I don't think people are purposefully doing it for the most part, but they're buying into it, and it's just not satisfying to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I remember too, there were certain things that were being taught, and then once I started, like the idea that postmodernism was equated with moral relativism, that was a big deal, right, in the Christian church. And I guess it still is, but it's this idea that Christians are really afraid of the idea of relativism. And I get it, but I remember when I actually read the works of like Jean-Francois Lyotard, the guy that actually coined the phrase postmodern, it really was like, oh, wait, this isn't at all what I had been taught. And so I think what I started to see was a skepticism towards power structures. As I became skeptical towards power structures, because they would say something, this is what this means, or this is what this is, and then bit by bit, those things would become unraveled. So postmodernism means X, and then I would go to read the actual text from postmodern writers, and I'd be like, oh, well, it doesn't mean X. It actually means a bunch of different things, but it surely doesn't mean X, and X is only an implication drawn from it. And so why is it that you can't think critically, or why is it that you can't engage properly, and why do you need to resort to straw men in order to kind of uphold your position? And then it was like, oh, well, this text, 1 Thessalonians 4, talks about, the rapture. And then you go and you read it in the original Greek, and you're like, that doesn't say that shit at all. Like, there is no rapture going on there.
There are two raptures here.
Yeah, what is going on? The rapture is not in the Bible, folks. I'm telling you. But you start to read it, and then I started thinking, I was like, what is going on here? And so it was my position of skepticism then towards those power structures that really sort of inaugurated the shift, if you will, or like you said, it was a gradual process. But for me, I did have that moment. I did have that sort of more cataclysmic moment that inaugurated the shift.
Yeah, I think an important point here is the commonality. Even though we have very widely different personalities and our experiences probably go with that, a more extroverted person is going to have a cataclysmic break. Someone like me is probably not going to have that, most likely. At the same time, I think there was this underlying thread of a concern for the social and political. I was never politically conservative, even though I was religiously for a time. I'm guessing you were kind of similar for the most part. There was always this level of sort of empathic concern for the least of these and stuff like that, which is a huge theme, obviously, in the history of Christianity. It's just not so much in American Christianity anymore, at least of the ilk that we were involved with. And so that thread was always there, and it always had this tension with our other beliefs. And so at some point, that just became the more dominating pair of the things in tension, and it usurped and transformed the rest of it. You talked about N.T. Wright, and I can't believe I didn't mention that. That was as much an influence on me as it was for you, and kind of the commonality there was Wright was basically saying, since Luther, Protestants have completely misinterpreted Paul in basically every way. He tries to kind of smooth it over as not being too radical, but it's super radical. And so much so that I've even heard evangelicals, John Piper for one, say that even if N.T. Wright is correct, that we've misinterpreted Paul, because Wright is using the same exegetical tools that evangelicals have always championed against liberals, against them. And so Piper said, even if he's correct, I don't believe it. I'll take Luther over him.
Wow.
Almost admitting I'll believe against what the exegesis tells us.
Okay,
because
and see, and
this is
that
too
again,
important to me.
right? And again, what that does is what that demonstrates then is that there's just this radical fear, man. There's this radical fear that is, and I get it. I guess human nature is maybe in one sense essentially driven by fear. That might be the most primal of all instincts. I mean, maybe that's what language is. It's the seeking to control. It's the seeking to control the material environment that is constantly in flux and out of our control, and so we need to slap labels on things so that we can try to understand it, which is ultimately then a response based on fear or the need to control or the need for comfort. But
Paging Dr. Freud?
yeah, exactly. Welcome. Please sit on my sofa. But it's that when I see that now, it seems so clear to me that there's something wrong. That there's something wrong with that, with giving power to that fear. And I think that's where I start now a lot of times in my philosophical outlook is that radical skepticism towards any sort of legitimized fear through the constraints of religious or political or systemic institutionalization. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so I think that's really what philosophy is for me, is seeking to understand those conditions and then ultimately the seeking to challenge them.
Yeah, there's this definite theme in philosophical history of being exactly that. As much as people would claim that, Kant was trying to defend Protestantism against the Enlightenment, and Hegel was trying to defend, basically tyranny over against freedom, and things like that. There's a long history of philosophy being about questioning the social status quo. I mean, it's Socrates' founding moment is exactly that. And is it other times where it becomes entrenched into the status quo, into the hierarchy itself? Yeah, of course, that happens. But then there's always another side to it. Someone else in the philosophical journey that's coming about questioning the legitimacy of that. And I think we definitely see ourselves, hopefully, to be somewhere in that space.
So what do you think, for someone listening who is like, they took a philosophy class in college and they fucking hated it, especially if they went to an American university, or they hear philosophy and it just seems impractical. It seems like, okay, yeah, that's just something that, I don't know, that doesn't have any real import for a global economy or for any sort of society or anything like that. What would be your argument? Get on your soapbox, and what is your argument for why philosophy is important?
I guess I'll be doing exactly this tomorrow as this fall semester starts, most likely. I hear that a lot from students especially, who probably took a philosophy course, failed it, and that's how they're taking it again with me. And I can't necessarily convince them that the life of the mind is a worthwhile pursuit. Either they're going to buy that or they're not. That probably says more about their psychology than it says about anything else. But at the very least, I can try and sell them on the fact that this is important stuff, and the very fact that it's not necessarily monetizable is what makes it so important. These questions we're going to address, things like what kind of life should you live? What is the ideal form of society? These kind of questions, if you ignore them, you're basically saying that they don't matter at all. or at least you don't care enough about them to dedicate time to thinking about them. And I don't think that anybody, given the proper state of mind and the proper impetus, would say that. Even the most diehard relativist has a really strong ethical sort of underpinning, right? I mean, you can't tell me that, the post-structuralists and the postmodernists in any way weren't fighting for an ethical concern. Of course they were. It was against sort of, sort of stratified meta-ethics that they were criticizing and things like that. But no one does philosophy, no one even has a life without thinking about what kind of life should I live. At the very least, you do it at 2 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep. And that's because, you've been busy all day and your mind's basically telling you this stuff is fucking important. Think about it now. I will keep you up and not let you sleep until you do it. And so you take drugs to make yourself go to sleep. If you have to take drugs to make yourself not think about these things, then that says that they're important.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's my life, man. I still go through that now, constantly. My mind is always on. It's very difficult for it to shut off, and then I wake up constantly thinking about things. I remember when I was finishing up writing for my PhD thesis, the most crucial portion of my thesis, that is kind of like the linchpin at which it turns, came to me in a dream. No shit, bro. It came to me. I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was like 3:30 in the morning, and I was like, oh my god, that's the answer. That's it. That's how I figured out. I couldn't figure out how to kind of position the argument or how to understand something. And it came to me in a fucking dream. I woke up at 3 in the morning, and I pulled out my cell phone, and I was like, either I can get up and start writing now, or I can fall back to sleep and then I'll forget it, or I'm just going to leave myself a note. So I just wrote myself a note in my phone. So I wrote like a paragraph or two. And I went back to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, and I was like, this is it. And then from then on, it was smooth sailing. So I don't know. The muse came upon me, so to speak.
It's got to be all the LSD you took in your early 20s.
Yeah.
Because all my
Flashback.
dreams are just being in my underwear in high school and not having a paper that's due today.
Do you still
That's
have
like
those?
Every dream is basically that. Some version of that.
You still have those dreams, dude?
All the time. Fucking hate it. It's so lame.
Really? That
Yeah.
is so funny. Yeah,
the
my
worst.
dreams have morphed. See, I don't have those ones as much. Now my dreams have shifted towards me being bald. Since, my hair, at this point, it's like, once you get to your 30s, the hair starts to get a little thinner. And so now it's like I have dreams about having long flowing hair, or dreams about not having any hair, or I have dreams about being fat. Or I had a dream the other day about, this is also because I was listening to someone talk about Christian Bale in that movie, The Machinist, where his body withers away. And I've been working out and eating this plant-based diet for the most part, so I've kind of lost a little bit of weight. And someone said, they're like, oh, you look like you've lost weight. And I'm like, well, I'm not trying to lose weight. I'm trying to just be in shape, And so I had a dream that I withered away into nothing like Christian Bale in The Machinist. So those are my dreams now. They're all vanity and all vain, but...
Or you're just dreaming in avant-garde filmmaking, which is pretty amazing.
Ooh, I like that idea. That's better. Yeah, I agree. I think I used to tell my students, see, for me, I come at it from a pretty hardline perspective. I almost believe that philosophy is just ethics, ultimately for me. I'm really only concerned with philosophy that has immediate practical application. Well, maybe not immediate, but that has practical application. So for me, philosophy isn't just navel-gazing, as a lot of times people claim that it is. Philosophy for me is always about transformation of self, or transformation of culture, or transformation of the globe, or whatever. And that's really the type of philosophy that most interests me, is the kind of philosophy that aims towards that. And so that's why I'm interested in the type of philosophy that you and I engage in, which is sometimes couched as continental philosophy, right? Because it tends to be a lot more interested in politics, in culture, in religion, in society. And it has a sort of leftist political bent, whereas American analytic philosophy might fit more into that sort of navel-gazing stereotype.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, to note that the 20th century had a very strong divide between those two schools of thought, right? Where continental philosophy is much more what some would probably call like abstract sociology, or study of culture.
Right.
And analytic philosophy was considered itself to be much more of a science. with absolute rules and problems, and everybody addresses the same things. But the 21st century is really moving away from that in a way that I think we would both agree is beneficial to both sides. In that continental philosophy is getting back to the idea of finding out truth. It's getting back to metaphysics, which is the study of ultimate reality. And analytic philosophy is much more open towards the social and political and towards the more abstract ideas that have usually been the storehouse of continental philosophy. I'm thinking of your Pittsburgh school of John McDowell and Robert Brandom and others in the analytic side. And then, Beju and Zizek and, for me, Meillassoux on the continental side as having much more in common than they ever would have had in the last 100 years.
Yeah, there's a scholar in the UK. His name is Pete Wolfendale, and he is I heard somebody once say this about another philosopher, but it fits with him. It's like he sprinkles philosophy on his cereal. Like, it is, the guy lives it, man. He lives it. He is a trip. But I remember him. He started off. He was at a university doing his PhD in a continental school, and then he found Brandom and the Pittsburgh school, and I think that really had a great influence on him, and now he is pretty well adept at both analytic and continental schools of thought, and I think he's really trying to bridge the divide, like Wilfrid Sellers and Ray Brassier and I just said a Brandom, and like something within that sphere, and I'm sure he's I haven't talked to him in a couple of years, but he's a great guy. If you are out there, check out his Twitter page and Google his blog and things like that. If you're interested in philosophy, he's a pretty deep thinker. Don't always agree with him on everything, but he's definitely a very deep thinker, and he's bridging that divide.
Yeah, I think I saw a lecture once where he was speaking and he had a shirt that said "Team Logocentrism."
Okay.
Which was amazing.
Right on. So what is your interest now in philosophy? What are you doing? What are you thinking about?
You talked about how immediate ethical concern is very important to you.
Right.
And I think I absolutely share that, except I think for me, and I'm not saying that you would disagree necessarily, but I think that the incredibly abstract stuff that philosophy is capable of doing is of import to ethical and social concerns, and in fact is more important now than it's ever been. I think it was Zizek who said the classic idiom is to stop thinking so much and just do, but he wants to reverse it and say stop doing, stop acting, and think, because this impetus to just always act and always do ends up making our actions fruitless, because we're not stopping and thinking theoretically about what exactly we're doing and the reasons for it. And I'm definitely find that to be kind of a personal motto, right? There's so much in culture, there's so much encouragement to just do stuff, just change, right? If you're not out there and you're not changing society for the better, then you're a waste of time, or you're not doing anything of import. And that just rings really false to me, because so much of that stuff ends up being basically analogous to the person who, is very diligent with recycling their own material. You get some personal ethical satisfaction out of it. Psychologically, you get to pat yourself on the back for doing a good job, and literally nothing changes, and we're all going to die in 50 years anyway. And that just seems incredibly fruitless to me. And so that's a scientific analogy, but I think in philosophy, the idea is to not worry about solving specific problems immediately or anything like that, but to use philosophy to kind of reconfigure where we are in really abstract senses, in terms of what does it mean to be human, and really kind of concrete senses of how can we change society for the better. I think it was Meillassoux once said that philosophy is the possibility of being intelligently crazy. And I love that line, because it's very unlike him to use those terms. And I like the idea of being a bit askew, being off, and that's a good thing, because so much of everything else in culture and society is always right on, that thinking a little bit crazy, a little off-hinged, can actually be beneficial. And that's what I kind of see as the cultural space of philosophy in the future.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think the only thing I would say is I have been heavily influenced by Sartre, right? And especially his later writings. And his understanding of praxis is through this dialectical process of where it's both and. So it isn't thinking or doing, but thinking is a doing, and doing is a moment of the dialectical process, the expression of thinking, right? And so for me, I'm just interested in the idea of doing, but any doing is going to be driven by a previous thinking, right? And then, so any doing is obviously going to be impacted by that. So then as you do, what you do is you reorder the paradigms of thought that influenced the initial thinking. I'm sorry, the initial doing. And then you do, and then you change the thinking, and then you think again. And then as you're thinking again from a different perspective, or from a different platform, or from a different paradigm, or a different field of paradigms is probably more accurate because it's more complex than that. And then what that does is that influences the doings in the next moment, so to speak. And so then the next moment is this a shift. It's a different type of doing then. So you're still doing, but it's a doing based now on this new type of thinking, or this different mode of thinking, or this different variation of thinking. And then that happens ad infinitum. So it's this constant thinking and doing. The doing influences the thinking influences the doing. They both change each other, and then the next moment or the next step or the next beat of historical development has been shifted or augmented by that tension or that relation between the two, and then you kind of perpetually do that. So that's the only thing I would say that for me, that's probably why I focus more on the doing. But nevertheless, focusing on the thinking is extremely important, which is why my next project moving forward, I want to do something about, I'm calling it a prolegomena to any future political economy. And it's the idea that I want to investigate the conditions to economic theory or political theory, and sort of from a Marxian perspective is to actually investigate the conditions that would allow for us to think and organize better economic and social communities, building from the ground up, building from empathy. So it's kind of within the Adam Smith and Marx tradition, moral sentiments and things like that, but doing it from a decidedly Marxist or anarcho-Marxist position.
It's interesting you talk about putting your work with Sartre in that prism of the thinking and the doing and the dialectical process and relationship between those two things. And that, I'm thinking while you're talking about that, about how, Meillassoux kind of influenced me in a similar way that Sartre has to you. And they couldn't be more different. I mean, Meillassoux talking about absolutist metaphysics, and Sartre's talking about, at least in, Critique of Dialectical Reason, basically philosophical kind of anthropology and sociology. They couldn't be more separated. But I see it very much the same in terms of the goal. Meillassoux talking about contingency and facticity, and he wants to sort of end the hegemony of philosophy of science that is inherent to all science, which tries to say that these ideas of probability and possibility are absolutes, and that there are natural laws which inherently govern the universe, and that we can know these things. At the very least, we have to believe those things in order for experience to make sense, which is Kant's argument, philosophical argument underpinning that whole thing. And everyone just kind of takes that as gospel, and Meillassoux wants to kind of undercut that whole thing and say that actually chaos can be a governing factor, and that doesn't mean that experience is impossible. It doesn't mean that science is impossible. It just changes how those things look, and he wants to explore what those things would look like given that change. And that sounds all really just like mumbo jumbo to anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, right? It sounds stupid, navel gazing, but Meillassoux, that's just the beginning for him. That reaches into ethics, and it reaches into philosophy of religion. He wants to talk about how we could have a possibility of a God existing, but not yet, in this chaos, and all these crazy things, which for him are crazy, obviously. It's intelligently crazy, but they get ultimately back to the ethical and political. What does this mean for our forms of society and our forms of self if these metaphysical principles are undercut and replaced by new ones? And that's the goal of it. It's a really circuitous way to get there, but that's the ultimate goal, rethinking what we can do with the world. And
okay, now And real quick, why is it a circuitous way of getting there? Because I think that would be important for anyone who might be listening to this saying, this is just nonsense. Why is he doing that? Because there is a purpose. There's a methodological purpose for getting there the way that he's getting there.
Yeah, in the same way that this hegemony of thought exists in science about natural laws and possibility governing experience and all this kind of stuff, the same thing works in economics and social forms, where we have these sort of absolute ideas of what needs to be the case in human nature. Things like, especially in capitalism, you have these ideas of inherent selfishness and seeking self-interest and whatnot. And he wants to question those things as much as he wants to question the hegemonic principles in science. And they go hand in hand.
Right.
And so this is a circuitous way of going from metaphysics and from philosophy of science and things like that to eventually get to the ethical and political, right? But just in a way that, Plato also did, in going from metaphysics and the forms to getting to justice in the Republic, which was really his ultimate goal anyway.
Yeah. I think, it would be really useful. I think if in the show notes, what if we put some links to a couple of, books or articles or something like that? What do you think? Is there something that you can, this isn't the Sticky Leaves, but a recommendation that you can give?
Yeah, we can put a couple of things in there in case someone wants to check it out further.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, so in closing, to kind of wrap up the segment, I would say that for anyone who has made it this far, check out some philosophy. Don't be afraid. Some of these names, that's what we'll do. We'll just list some of the names that we talked about. Check out some of these names, and don't be afraid to challenge yourself and in rethinking the world. There's a podcast called How Philosophy Can Ruin Your Life, which I think is kind of funny. Or How Philosophy Ruined My Life, or something like that, which is kind of funny. But for me, it's actually almost How Philosophy Saved My Life.
Yeah, I mean, those two things go hand in hand, right? It ruined your life in the sense that it sets you off track from where you were before.
Yeah.
But that's also in a different perspective, a saving.
That's absolutely true. Well, all right, brother. Let's wrap it up and let's move on to the next segmento. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, so this segment is called The Sticky Leaves, and it has to do with some sort of highbrow, Russian novel thing that Troy likes to talk about, the brothers and blah, 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 blah. But basically, it is talking about the things in this world that give meaning in a world that is meaningless. So, Troy, this week, what is giving you meaning? What is your sticky leaf or leaves?
All right, my sticky leaf this week. Let me ask you a question, Austin.
Yeah.
Did you, while a child, read the Berenstain Bears books?
Oh, yeah, dude. Yeah. I don't remember them, but I did.
Everybody did.
Yes.
Now, quickly, off the top of your head,
Okay.
spell Berenstein.
Well, the way you're saying it is making me think that it's Bearenstein. Berenstain.
Well, I mean, they're the Bears, and so it would be clever if they spelled it Bear. But that's not the point. It was the last part, the last syllable.
Oh, Stein. Berenstein. Like a good Jewish name.
Yeah, exactly. How confident are you? What's your confidence interval that you are correct?
That it's Stein or Berenstein? I would say I'm 80%.
Okay, I would have said I'm 99% sure, close to betting my life that it was E-I-N.
Oh, shit.
That is incorrect. It
What?
is A-I-N, Berenstain
What?
Bears. I had to look it up on Google, pictures of the books, to prove this was correct. And even then, I was not convinced, because I felt this must be a global conspiracy against my childhood, because I was so sure it's E-I-N. Now, apparently this is a global phenomenon, because I think something like 60 to 70% of people who are polled agree that it is E-I-N, and they have a very high level of confidence, like I did, that this is true.
Yeah.
And refuse to accept the truth when presented with facts because they are so sure this is the case. Now, this psychological phenomenon is called the Mandela effect, because I guess the same thing happened in the 80s or early 90s, because when Nelson Mandela was released from prison, eventually became president of South Africa, a lot of people thought that he had died in prison and were incredibly sure and confident that they had heard he had died in prison and refused to accept the fact that this was true because they were so sure of it. And so there are apparently a number of phenomena like this, where people are very sure, a large number of people are very sure that they knew something was true, even though it very clearly was not, and there's no evidence that ever was the case. So the significance of the Berenstain Bears things is that the show, Mr. Robot, which is the best show on television, bar none, in the show, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there is a reference to the FBI using the nomenclature Operation Berenstain. And if you haven't watched the show, go watch it and you'll see the significance of this. But apparently, the idea, I went into like the Reddit's wormhole to figure this out. A number of people have theorized that this proves the multiverse theory true, that there are multiple universes. One of them has the Berenstain, EIN, bears, and one of them has the Berenstain, AIN, bears, and that at some point in the past, these two universes mixed, or people were brought over from the E universe, where I come from and where you probably came from, into the A universe, where we now inhabit. And that there may be other things similar that were just slightly askew. It's almost the same universe, just a few little things like an E or an A on the Berensteins that are different. So basically, this effect, this phenomenon, proves multiverse theory true.
So it couldn't just be that a bunch of people just started saying it wrong?
Not possible. I am not wrong about this. Neither are you. Don't give up. Millions of people cannot be wrong. No,
I like
and,
that.
And Mr. Robot has sort of brought this back into the cultural attention, because people are now talking about how this might be affecting the show's end game. Are there multiverses in the show that we don't know about? Because it's not sci-fi at all, but maybe it's going to be. Anyway, my Sticky Leaves is a combination of Mr. Robot is fucking awesome, and also that multiverse has been proven true. And I want to go back to my universe where the EIN was, because I loved it much more.
Yeah, it's a better universe.
It's my home. I feel homeless in a Heideggerian sense. I have homelessness. I think all existential dread comes from the fact that the Berensteins changed. That's my thesis.
The root of it. You should write a book on that.
Yeah.
The Berenstain hypothesis.
I'm going to do it now. Our next segment is bullshitting, where we take some culturally popular trending topic and bullshit about it because we probably have no idea what's going on anyway. This week, we're talking about the naked Trump statue, is it?
Yeah. See, Troy actually has nothing. He doesn't know about this. I was on the phone with him the other day, and I had to tell him about it. He had not heard because he had been so diligently preparing for his students. You better get your students listening to this podcast, and then they can hear how much you care about them.
I wasn't doing shit for them. I was doing it for the administration.
Well, whatever. Students, don't listen to him. He's in denial. He loves you. So in New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles and a couple other cities, I think there were 5 cities, these massive statues of Donald Trump, naked Donald Trump, kind of all fat and bloated with his hands crossed on his stomach, fingers interlocking, not hands crossed, but I guess fingers interlocking over his belly, and a tiny, 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 tiny little penis, and no balls. These statues were erected, pardon the pun, they were erected. And the title of the artwork was "The Emperor Has No Balls." And there was no identification, really, of who it was. There was a signature at the base of the statue that just said Ginger, and so people didn't know who it was that had actually constructed these statues or placed them there. And it came out later that it was a guy by the name of Ryan McPherson, who was a part of this group. I think they're called In Decline. I don't even want to say it, because then I feel like I'm advertising for them. But fuck it, he's a part of this group that is like a clothing company / film collective. They make movies that are like controversial and edgy and anti-political and shit. But he's also the dude that was behind bum fights. So...
Worst person in the world status.
Yeah. And I think that like some people have tried to claim that bum fights was this commentary, like a social commentary on the plight of homelessness in America, rather than just realizing that it was this dumbass college kid who wanted to exploit homeless people and pay them malt liquor so that he could make millions of dollars.
Which he did, right?
which he did. Which
Yeah,
he
very very anti-political, anti-capitalist, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing is you go to the website where, so the Trump statues kind of, it was like a publicity stunt basically. Somehow the information then got linked to their website, and then you go to their website, and their website has all this information, and it shows their behind the scenes of them making the statues and stuff like that. And then it has their store, and on their store they're selling like balaclavas and mace, but it's called like pig spray or something like that. And they've got all these various things that are like protest gear and kind of like fuck the world and fuck the system sort of anarchist stuff. And so they're representing themselves like they're this political force for good, anti-state, anti-capital, anti-oppressive power structures, anti the emperor, Donald Trump and stuff. But then you find out that this guy was a part of bum fights. So I'm kind of confused. What is the deal here?
Okay, here's my bullshit theory.
Yeah.
Is this dude an accelerationist?
Maybe.
Like, you know how I'm going to defeat capitalism? I'm gonna like uber exploit homeless people. You know how I'm going to defeat Trump? I'm going to Trump harder than Trump.
I'm going to Trump harder.
I'm going to make Trump jealous, envious of how much Trumpier I am than him. Because who else would make fun of someone's dick size? Like Trump is obviously like, oh man, I can't believe I didn't think of that first. Damn it.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if he's actually kind of like, good play, man. Good play. That was a good one.
Some respect.
yeah, I get that. A good one. Yeah, that's something I would have done.
What purpose is this serving? Who are you possibly convincing to be in any way against Trump's policy proposals, if you can call them that, by making fun of his dick size? Like the whole stuff about his hands being small. Like what is being accomplished by this? It makes him angry. It makes him act like a child. I get that. And so you get a perverse pleasure out of seeing him act like a child. That kind of makes you a child too. You're a more intelligent child than he is, but that's not complimenting you at all. You're not convincing the people who support him. You're just reinforcing to them that he's being attacked by a biased media or whatever.
Right.
And it's definitely not moving the policy discussion in a more progressive direction. It's ignoring that. So what's being accomplished here? I really hate this whole thing.
I know, it seems like a cheap ploy just to line his own pockets, right? A cheap ploy to you kind of use the sort of language that leftists or that the Occupy Wall Street movement or that certain protesters might use, right? And you use that language, but then you put it on a hoodie or you put it on a scarf or you put it on a balaclava and you sell it for $20. And it's like you're doing your social duty, but at the same time you're also making a living. But it just seems to be a contradiction. It seems really dickish. Yeah,
it's just another example of leftists basically considering their political position to be moral like positioning.
Oh, moral posturing.
Moral posturing, that's what I mean. Moral posturing in the sense that I'm just going to make myself or prove to those around me that I am a better person than this. And by cynically mocking it. Right. There's a difference between mockery and satire. Now, Trump doesn't know the difference between those two things. He only knows mockery. He doesn't have the intelligence to satire, right? To satirically sort of analyze something. Mockery is his only tool. And by turning that mockery against him, you just make yourself the reverse, the bizarro version of him, and that's just useless. If you want to satirically use that, that's great. You want to great dictator him like Charlie Chaplin did to Hitler. That's amazing.
Great dictator?
That's what they should have called it.
The great dictator. Yeah. Oh, you know what, dude? This actually goes into... I was going to do this as a shitty minute, but this is so funny. I'm actually so tired of leftists trying to use political satire. Like, not everybody is Jon Stewart, okay? Just stop. Just fucking stop, okay? Like, it seems like any person who has like a left-leaning bent is trying on Twitter or some sort of social media thing to use political snark or political satire, and it's like, let the pros do it. Let the comedians do it, Because not all of us are good at it. I try it sometimes and it fails.
Yeah, and mostly it's more of that moral posturing, right?
That's exactly right.
That's the point of it. The goal of it's just to be like, oh, look at me, I'm the good, intelligent liberal.
Dude, you're going to love this. I was at this meeting the other day in LA that was raising awareness on human trafficking in Los Angeles. And that's not the funny part. But so we're sitting there, and there's this room filled. There's this room filled with, like 25 very attractive Christian women. Okay, and I don't know why, but for some reason, attractive women in Beverly Hills are all interested in raising awareness for human trafficking. So, if you're a hot girl and you want a social cause, go look for causes for advocating saving girls from human trafficking. But joking aside, it really is a problem in LA. So but that's not the funny part. The funny part is we're sitting there, and there were like maybe 5 dudes in the whole place. And I went with my buddy after we went rock climbing, and there was this guy that kind of like raised his hand and was kind of like, isn't there something we can do about this? Like, can't we go beat up the pimps? Like, can't we bring justice to them? And immediately I started laughing because I started thinking of that moral posturing. I was like, you just want every chick in this room to know that you're a good dude. That's what you want. You're kind of basically just saying, ladies, I care, and I want to beat up the bad guy.
That's kind of smart in a cynical way. Like, if the guy figured out, dude, all the hot chicks go here and there are no dudes. If I want to get laid, this is the perfect place to do it.
Well, he's not trying to get laid.
Just present myself as a good guy.
Yeah, he's not trying to get laid though. He's just trying to hold their hand.
Oh, okay.
Marry them.
Because it's all very religious. Yeah.
Right. He's just trying to marry them too young and before they really know each other so that they can bang.
That reminds me of the Always Sunny episode where I think it's Mac goes to an abortion rally to pick up chicks.
Yeah. Oh, it's so bad.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen that episode, you should go watch it. It's
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah. And, with the wrapping up the naked Trump thing, when I first saw the statue, it made me laugh. I thought it was funny. The emperor has no balls. It is funny. It's a pretty good little ploy. But then when you find out the story on the back end, you start to realize that the guy's kind of a douche. So, I don't know. Let's stop sharing the meme, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, fuck that guy. We're out.
With first-class legroom, 3 cocktails for everyone, and a schedule you can depend on.
All right, now we're throwing it to our hip-hop correspondent, Mike Burns. What's up?
Hey, what's up? It's This Week in Hip Hop with Michael Burns on Owls at Dawn. I'm excited to talk to you this week, as always. I'm only going to talk about a couple things this week. We're going to keep it kind of simple. I'm going to tell you about the track of the week, album of the week, that one's obvious, and then talk a little bit about an article that came out in the New York Times this weekend that is on the issue of white rappers. Okay, so to get started, our track of the week, I'll keep it simple. It's by an artist named Calez, who's an artist out of Chicago. You might not have heard of him before, but he is a part of that constantly progressing and impressive Chicago scene. The song by Calez is called Still Good, and it features Alex Wiley and Mick Jenkins, 2 other excellent Chicago rappers, and then Donnie Trumpet, who you likely know from The Social Experiment, Chance the Rapper. It's just a perfect song. It's still good. I think Calez has been exploring his sound a little bit in recent years, and I think he's really landed on something here. So check this out, Still Good by Calez. The release of the week, this is easy. Frank Ocean put an album out. Technically, he put 2 out, but I'm here talking about Blonde. Listen to it, buy it, do whatever you got to do. This record pulls from all the best parts of the past decade or so of popular and independent music. It has everything from kind of trap beats to melodic sounding indie guitars. It has singing, it has rapping, it has impressive production. And of course, for those of us concerned with hip-hop, it also has a verse from Andre 3000. This is on the song Solo, Reprise. And at the end of this verse, Andre 3000 takes what some are seeing as a shot at Aubrey Drake Graham, in which he says that in his mind, he was under the impression that rappers wrote their own verses. Interestingly enough, a couple days after this comes out, we have Drake taking a shot at Meek Mill again at one of his shows. I would bet that Drake will do nothing that even seems like he is coming at Andre 3000, because that would not end well. But listen to that track, listen to the album, and I don't think it's hyperbolic at this point to say that Blonde might be the album of the year. All right? Now, I want to talk for a little bit about this article that came out this week. It's called White Rappers Clear of a Black Planet. It's written by John Karamonica, who's a writer for the New York Times, came out August 18th. And this article talks about the contemporary position and situation, or even the figure of the white rapper. And it starts from this position that, for decades in the history of hip-hop, white rappers kind of had to earn their way in and sort of have some claim to authenticity, have some cosign, respect and participate in the culture to some extent. And he talks about a couple contemporary artists he still sees as taking this path. He references Earl Droog and Action Bronson as white artists who have built their careers off honoring traditional East Coast hip-hop music. But he shifts to talk about what's happening with the newer generation of white artists. And I'm going to read one quote from the article. He says this, quote, "But now we have arrived in the post-accountability era of white rap, when white artists are flourishing almost wholly outside the established hip-hop industry, evading black gatekeepers and going directly to overwhelmingly white consumers, resulting in what can feel like a parallel world, aware of hip-hop's center, but studiously avoiding it." And I think this is the really interesting part of the article. He identifies these separate lanes of white rap that have emerged, that don't have to worry about claims to authenticity or participating in the history or the culture of hip-hop, because they found this new fan base, which is largely white suburban kids. And because they can make money and get airplay and sell records off that, they can kind of avoid the traditional hurdles that one would sort of run through as a white artist trying to participate in hip-hop. Now, he points out the fact that this is particularly troubling because hip-hop in general has moved in this political way, in a way that sort of has mirrored the discussions on race and inequality that have been so dominant in our culture. So at the end of the article, he says this. Thank you for listening. I'm going to read one more quote, so stay with me here. But the author says this. He says, quote, "This latest wave of white rappers, however, is demonstrating how many different ways there are to try to elide racial conversation while still making rap music. It is an especially vexing moment for this, given how black pop, thanks to stars like Beyonce and Kendrick Lamar, is increasingly political, and discussion of black cultural erasure is becoming commonplace on social media and beyond," end quote. And I think this is real important. And I think it's a huge problem when rap music and hip-hop culture more generally has always been something that's tackled issues of urbanism and violence and race and inequality and police violence, is instead getting turned into this kind of suburb rap. And there's kind of two tracks you can see here. When we think about white rappers, you either have this kind of hyper-earnest good guy rap of someone like Macklemore. You have the jokey frat rap of someone like Lil Dicky. Footnote, fuck Lil Dicky. But both lanes are kind of avoiding traditional hip-hop culture and some of the issues that come with that. Now, in Macklemore, we have someone who attempts to deal with this with self-congratulatory songs like White Privilege and White Privilege 2. And I think it's interesting to kind of contrast this to, a quote-unquote white rapper who hasn't fallen into this trap. So I always think about LP from Run the Jewels. And LP, we don't often hear referred to as a quote-unquote white rapper because he's been a part of the New York scene since the early 90s, as a founding member of Company Flow, was on Raucous Records, founded Def Jux, and now is in a group with Killer Mike. Well, why is LP not a quote-unquote white rapper? Because this guy has had an overt commitment to the culture in an unabashedly non-ironic way since the 90s. Is this someone who doesn't avoid questions of race and violence and issues going on in the contemporary city? So I think it's an interesting contrast to that, but whatever. Read the article, tell me what you think. And to wrap up, once again, I'd love to hear from you all. So hit me up on Twitter. It's at Michael O. Burns. Thank you so much to August Flight Gordon for our intro music. Please look him up. And once again, shouts to the guys at Owls at Dawn for letting me do this. So until next week, I'm Michael, and I'm out.
Cruising the sky as smoothly as a bird, you scarcely realize you are traveling faster than man has ever traveled before.
All right on. Thank you, Michael, for your segment this week. Troy, what do you think?
That was good stuff, man. I like to hear Michael go off on some hip-hop theory in addition to the recommendations.
Yeah, me too. You were talking about having him on for a full-length episode, actually, to kind of do something in that vein, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, talk about hip-hop and politics, something like that. That could be really interesting stuff.
Sweet. Well, when he gets his ass back to the UK and he gets a little more settled, then we have to arrange something like that. For sure.
For sure. And can I also say that I take back everything, not negative, because there's anything negative, but less than positive about Frank Ocean.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I've only done that in private, but I'm admitting it now in a public sphere. That
Okay.
I wasn't a fan of Frank Ocean before last week.
And
but
now?
Damn.
Yeah.
That,
Right?
That's all I got to say is damn.
Does it somehow retroactively change how you view his earlier music now too? Like, have you gone back and listened to like Novocaine or any of those tracks, and then been like, yeah, okay, I dig it now?
Yeah, I haven't yet, but I'm going to. I'm planning to go back on Channel Orange. I mean, not like
Yeah.
our future shit, but
Right.
I'm going to go back and check that stuff out again.
Sick. Well, all right. Well, so thank you so much, Michael. We are heading out. Owls are going to be taking flight. Us and our parliament are we're flying. Make sure to hit us up. Troy, where can they find us?
You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at owls_at_Don.
Absolutely. So hit us up, drop us a line, scream at us, engage with us, get involved somehow, and we would love to hear from you. And if you do dig the show, please feel free to go over to iTunes and leave a review and a rating, preferably a 5-star rating. If you hate the show, then just ignore it. Just forget about it. But if you like the show, then please leave one of those nice high 5-star ratings. It really helps us, and it'll help us to make more content in the future as we hopefully expand our audience.
If you hate the show, why the hell are you at minute 60-something?
That's a good point.
Do people hate listen to our podcast?
So much
Actually,
that they just
I want
keep
to
listening.
hear from you. If you hate listen to our podcast, I want to hear from you. I want to know about this.
Just don't leave a rating.
No, just don't do that.
Yeah.
Just yell at us. All right, Das Vidania, Amerikanski.